Welcome back to the End Time Remnant YouTube channel. This is Dorothy, and I pray all of you are doing well. On this video, I wanted to address something that I feel is very important for the church to remember, especially the times in which we are living. Over the past couple of months, there's been, for lack of a better word, some pretty shocking stories and allegations coming out surrounding church leadership, right? Regardless of the size of the church, or the popularity of the preacher, or the individual details of the scandals that they find themselves caught up in, I think it's very important that we, the church, have a talk. Because recently I received revelation from Scripture that helped me to make sense of it all. So let's go to Scripture. 1 Samuel chapter 8, verses 4 through 21 reads, "Then all of the elders of Israel gathered together and came to Samuel at Ramah, and said to him, 'Look, you are old, and your sons do not walk in your ways. Now make us a king to judge us like all the nations.' But the thing displeased Samuel when they said, 'Give us a king to judge us.' So Samuel prayed to the Lord. And the Lord said to Samuel, 'Heed the voice of the people and all that they say to you, for they have not rejected you, but they have rejected me, that I should not reign over them. According to all the works which they have done since the day that I brought them up out of Egypt, even to this day, with which they have forsaken me and served other gods, so they are doing to you also. Now therefore heed their voice. However, you shall solemnly forewarn them, and show them the behavior of the king who will reign over them.' So Samuel told all the words of the Lord to the people who asked him for a king. And he said, 'This will be the behavior of the king who will reign over you. He will take your sons and appoint them for his own chariots to be his horsemen, and some will run before his chariots. He will appoint captains over his thousands, and captains over his 50s, will set some to plow his ground and reap his harvest, and some to make his weapons of war and equipment for his chariots. He will take your daughters to be perfumers, cooks, and bakers, and he will take the best of your fields, your vineyards, and your olive groves, and give them to his servants. He will take 1/10 of your grain and your vintage, and give it to his officers and servants. He will take your male servants, your female servants, your finest young men, and your donkeys, and put them to his work. He will take 1/10 of your sheep, and you will be his servants. And you will cry out in that day because of your king whom you have chosen for yourselves, and the Lord will not hear you in that day.' Nevertheless, the people refused to obey the voice of Samuel, and they said, 'No, but we will have a king over us, that we may be like all the nations, and that our king may judge us and go out before us and fight our battles.' And Samuel heard all the words of the people, and he repeated them in the hearing of the Lord. So the Lord said to Samuel, 'Heed their voice and make them a king.'" I know that was a pretty long passage of scripture, but it is very important that I include all of it in this video. So what do we know about the Lord, and what do we know about the children of Israel up until this point? Okay, we know that the Lord brought them out of the bondage of Egypt. We know that he caused the children of Israel to cross the Red Sea to safety, and he drowned Pharaoh and all of his army. We know that the Lord provided for them in the wilderness, right? It may not have been what they wanted, but it was what they needed. Okay, so there was provision there. We know that the Lord allowed them to cross over the Jordan on dry land into the promised land. Okay, we also know that the Lord fought with and for them as they overtook their enemies in the promised land. So they were not able to just walk on the promised land and move in. There were battles to be fought. However, they won those battles because of God. God was with them. God fought with them. And we also know that God made sure to give them the land of milk and honey that he'd promised, right? So we're talking about a protector, we're talking about a provider, and we're talking about someone who's faithful. You hear what I say? Yahweh had already proven himself to be a faithful provider and protector to the children of Israel. Yet after all the Father had done for them, they still wanted a human king. They wanted a man to serve in the position of king. They wanted someone they could see. They wanted someone they could touch. And ultimately, the revelation is this: man wanted a physical king because they wanted someone to idolize in the flesh. God wasn't enough for them. The passage of scripture that I just shared helps us to understand that God did not want the children of Israel to have a king. He was their king and wanted to continue to protect and provide for them. However, they were adamant about having a king. So God sent Samuel to warn them. And what was the warning? In a nutshell, if I give you a man as king, he is going to be flawed. He's going to be wicked, and he is going to do wicked things because that is what the flesh is often inclined to do. This king is not going to put your needs first. He's going to put his own needs first. Okay? This king will not have your best interests at heart, but he's going to do everything he needs to do to benefit himself. And that includes taking from you to add to him. And in the end, you will cry to me because of how horribly he treats you, but I will not hear from you. That was the warning in a nutshell, right? But even after hearing the warning from the prophet Samuel, the people still wanted a king so that they could be like all the other nations with a figurehead to go out and fight their battles, as though the Lord hadn't already fought countless battles for them, right? So the Lord told Samuel, go right ahead and make them a king. Now, if you are at all familiar with scripture, then you know the first king of Israel was Saul, and he turned out to be an absolute disaster, just as God warned. So the question is this: what exactly does any of this have to do with the modern day church? A lot. Okay, a lot. As the days, weeks, and months continue to go by, church, we are going to see people in high places of church leadership fall. And while they are going to fall for many different reasons, it is important to know how God felt about man leading his people to begin with. People are naturally idolatrous, right? We're wrapped in flesh and are therefore constantly at war with the spirit. We have a bad habit of elevating people and putting them on pedestals of perfection when only God deserves to be there. We like to place all these expectations on people who are just wrapped in flesh just like us. We turn them into these spiritual superheroes, and then we're greatly disappointed when they turned out to be just as flawed, deceitful, and carnal as everyone else, right? 1 Peter 4:17 says, for the time is come that judgment must begin at the house of God. We are living in the end times, and the corruption can no longer be contained within the four walls of many of these church buildings. The ungodliness of the corrupt is seeping out for all to see, and that includes the lost and the unsaved. You got unsaved people looking at all of these headlines of church folks shaking their heads on some, oh, see, that's why I don't mess with them like that. That's why I don't even go to church like that. That's why I don't play those games. Look at these church folks, right? Because of man's need for a king, many are going to struggle as the wickedness of their very own pastors are exposed. Many are going to struggle with their faith. Many are going to struggle in their walk. Many are going to struggle as they seek to understand just how on earth the people they placed so high on pedestals have fallen so low. And the reason they're going to struggle is because they've placed more belief, trust, and faith in the king, right, which is the pastor, bishop, apostle, or prophet, than they did God himself. Their idolatry of these men and women is going to cause them to struggle. And when this happens, I just want you to understand the faulty foundation for many will be shaken because many of these people were not connected to the vine, Jesus Christ. Okay? They were connected to pastor. They were connected to bishop. They were connected to apostle. They were connected to all these ideas they had in their head about how perfect these people were. And that is where all of their faith was, not in the perfection of Jesus Christ, but the perceived perfection of their leaders. There's going to be a lot of heartbroken people. The reason why God never wanted his chosen people to have a human king was because he knew what mankind was capable of. And we are seeing all of that and then some today. There are countless spiritual leaders who fit scripture to the T. Okay? They have churches, but the vast majority of the decisions they make are to benefit themselves, just as Scripture warned. When you take some time to go back over the passage of Scripture that I read earlier, just look at how many times the word take is in that particular passage of Scripture. God is warning the people, if you get a human king, he will take from you. He has not come to give you anything. He will take from you. Okay? Do we not see that happening today? Do we not see that as we look around at so many of these supposed men and women of God? Just the other day, I was scrolling through YouTube. I came across a video and didn't know whether to laugh hysterically or cry for the spiritually blind, deaf, and dumb. The people with absolutely no discernment, the people trapped by idolatry, the people who will end up spiritually, emotionally, and financially robbed by these pillagers who call themselves shepherds of God's people. It was a hot fire mess. So here we have Miss Juanita Bynum. Listen, if you follow her, God bless you. That's your right and your business. I'm not here to go back and forth with anybody about who they choose to follow, right? In keeping with the purpose of this video, I want to show you a literal example of why God did not originally want a human to rule over his people. Right? Humans are wrapped in flesh, and when given a platform, many of them become oppressed by spirits of pride and mammon. So in the video, her 65th birthday garnered quite the celebration. Okay, what a lovely throne for the queen to sit on as all of her idolaters celebrated her. Let me tell you something. Jesus Christ is seated on a throne today at the right hand of his Father, but his earthly ministry was most definitely on the humble. Okay, our Messiah engaged in nothing of the sort because his focus was on sharing the gospel and drawing in lost souls. Jesus Christ made himself of no reputation. So what exactly am I looking at on this video? Mark 10:45 says, "For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life a ransom for many." If in fact you are a disciple and a follower of Christ, then you have been sent out on the Great Commission. None of that involves self-promotion. None of it. They claim to be servants of the Lord, but they are actually servants of themselves, and they have heaped up for themselves a following of the spiritually blind and deaf. Absolutely nothing but pride, greed, and flesh on display. Big old picture of herself, entire table to herself, balloons and decorations for days. Just opulence, right? Oh, Dorothy, what's so wrong with celebrating your birthday? Well, the answer is absolutely nothing. But as someone who's in the position of a servant, this right here reads prideful. This right here reads self-promotion. And this right here reads greedy. Because at some point, despite the lavish celebration already underway, the screen flashes not one but 4 different ways for other people to sow their money into her. That's one thing. They will never miss an opportunity to shake down as many people as they possibly can. And again, that aligns with the scripture I read earlier. They take from you in order to add to their own. These are the king's behavior. This is the king's behavior that I talked about from scripture earlier. And for those of you who may feel like I'm being way too hard on her, that there is nothing wrong with celebrating your spiritual leader and all that jazz, listen. This is the same woman who wears Gucci belts, but charged folks $1,500 for an intensive that was supposedly teaching them how to pray. If you can make sense of that, you go right ahead, but I can't. None of this types of foolishness has anything to do with spreading the gospel of Jesus Christ. None of it. But human kings and queens want to be on display. Human kings and queens want to be the center of attention. Human kings and queens want to fulfill their lusts, whatever that may look like. In her case, clearly it's money. And in the process, the idolatrous people who follow them begin to take their eyes off of the real King of Kings, which is Jesus Christ. And God knew this. And this is why he didn't want his people to have a human king. He wanted to be our king. But he relented and allowed the people to reject him so that they could have the king that they wanted. And they ended up getting precisely the type of king they deserved. And God is still doing that today. Far too many in the church of today have traded in Jesus' kingship and personal relationship for the idolatry of a man or woman in the pulpit. And I just wanted to create this video to put this all in perspective. Something tells me this is going to be quite the year of exposure. And if you are not connected to the vine, Jesus Christ, you run the risk of being discouraged in your faith as you see some of the people you admire most get caught up in things that you never would have imagined. When it comes to these church leaders, my suggestion would be that you consistently refrain from placing any of them on pedestals. They're just people. They're just people. They're mere flesh. They are imperfect. And while it is important to show love and respect to all, now is not the time to get so wrapped up in idolizing flawed human leadership that you actually forget the real King of Kings. And that's really all I wanted to share with you on this video. God willing, I'll see you next time.